Welcome to this edition of PM in the PM. This is my weekly podcast where I take a recent event and look at how it links to the ACCA performance management syllabus areas. What you do by listening is get an appreciation of real-world application of the PM syllabus. This means it will help you when you're learning, you're more likely to remember, and it will help you give better answers to those application questions. And as I always say, not only will this help with PM, it will help with APM as well. I'm recording this podcast shortly after the December 2024 exam results came out. And once again, performance management gets the award for the lowest pass rate in the applied skills, with just 41% of candidates managing to pass in December. If you got your results and you passed your December sitting, congratulations. If not, all you can do now is just regroup, move on and focus on the next sitting. And the focus today is going to be on life cycle costing. This is syllabus area B, but we do stray into a couple of other areas briefly. And the trigger for this podcast was a scientific report in Nature magazine, which may have passed you by, but I was interested because they used life cycle costing to compare the design of two bridges. And what they did is they looked at these two designs and they related it to various factors, including how climate change could impact on those designs. For example, how it would affect maintenance requirements and therefore costs. They looked at the recycling rates when parts of the bridge would need replacing and at decommissioning. And what they did is they sensitivity tested their life cycle model. And by doing that, they demonstrated that the impact of climate change on one of the designs could increase the cost by 12.4%. Now, sensitivity testing itself is also in the syllabus. That's in syllabus area C, risk and uncertainty. And I was quite interested in how in this article they were looking at not only life cycle costing, but also sensitivity testing. And in real life, that's what happens. The performance management syllabus separates these areas out, but there's a lot of overlap and a lot of these techniques can be used together. And if you forgive the pun, this is a really good example of a bridge between two syllabus areas. In this article, the factors that affected the life cycle cost included the environmental impact, the frequency of preventative maintenance, the recycling rate, both at the end of life and as parts were replaced, and as I mentioned earlier, climate change scenarios which impact on temperature and humidity. But obviously this podcast isn't really about bridges, it's about life cycle costing. So what is life cycle costing? It's one of the 5 specialist cost accounting techniques which come under syllabus area B. The other 4 being activity-based costing, target costing, throughput accounting, and environmental accounting. The idea of life cycle costing is to be able to appraise over the entire life cycle. This includes from the design and development stages, introduction to the market, right up to withdrawal from the market. Sometimes it's called a cradle-to-grave approach. A good example is a nuclear power station. A lot of nuclear power stations have been built without taking into account decommissioning, but the cost of that decommissioning is not small. And what life cycle costing does, it includes all of those costs, and therefore the profitability of something over its entire life can be established. And if you think about the more traditional approaches, where perhaps we use a 12-month period for accounting, that's relatively arbitrary, and the life cycle approach doesn't use an arbitrary timescale of 12 months. In the exam, it's likely that you'll get some questions on life cycle costing in either section A or section B. That's the objective test sections. And one of the nuances that is often overlooked is life cycle costing can obviously be used for products, but it can be used for services. It can also be applied to specific projects and customers. You can carry out a life cycle approach when you're evaluating the value of a customer to your organization. So what costs would we include in life cycle costing? Well, as we've said, it's everything. So at the research and design stage, that would include design, producing prototypes, testing those prototypes, also the cost of data and information, staff training. When we get to production stages, obviously all of the production costs, distribution, marketing, advertising, inventory costs, and disposal costs. Some of those are one-off costs, like disposal costs should be one-off, but others are ongoing. Production and distribution, marketing and advertising, those are all ongoing costs. And if there's a calculation question, you may need to set up a table to make sure you take into account those one-off costs and those regular costs. along with the regular revenues. An obvious area the examiner could go to is, what are the advantages of life cycle costing? One of the key advantages is a better decision on a go, no-go decision. Do we go ahead with this project or not? If you look at it over the entire life cycle and it doesn't make profit, then why would you be proceeding with that project? Another important advantage is the impact of design on the cost. Between 70 and 90% of the costs are incurred based on the design. That doesn't mean it costs that much at the design stage, but because of the way something is designed, it commits to those ongoing costs going forward. And by taking this life cycle approach, steps can be taken to design out those costs. Back to this article around the bridges, it could be that it's better to have a higher upfront cost to build a bridge if it leads to lower costs ongoing. We have a saying in the UK, painting the Forth Bridge. Now the Forth Bridge is a bridge in Scotland, and historically they used to paint it from one side to the other and then go back to the start and do it again. They don't do that anymore because I believe it's had a coating, but maybe if it had been designed differently, then it wouldn't have needed painting every year. But how much does it cost to have a team painting a bridge continuously for its entire life? Another advantage of life cycle costing is it can help minimize the time to market. So once again, if you look at the design, maybe the design can be changed in a way that the product can go to market earlier. That means revenues begin earlier. That means it will spend longer in the market without competitors and gain more market share. It also leads to a shorter break-even time. So minimizing the time to market is another advantage. Taking this approach leads to better pricing decisions because you can take all of those costs into account. It encourages long-term thinking, and it allows you to take in other factors, and this will include external factors such as the environmental impact. One of the other parts of the syllabus is environmental management accounting, and life cycle costing is one of the approaches that can be used for environmental management accounting. So what are the disadvantages? It's much harder to do life cycle costing, particularly because data is hard to find, often need to make many assumptions around data and costs. And the harder something it is, the more time that's needed. Obviously, the more expensive it is to carry out life cycle costing compared to something a bit more traditional. Thanks for listening to this podcast where we've looked at life cycle costing, which is part of syllabus area B of the performance management exam. These advanced costing techniques, including life cycle costing, do get tested regularly. So I'd like to thank you again for tuning in to PM in the PM. I hope you found this episode informative, and I'd love to receive your feedback in the comments. If you were successful with the December exams and you're looking to do PM next, please do reach out to me. However, if you failed PM and you want some help to get that pass mark, once again, please do reach out to me. Until next time, this is Richard Guyver, signing off.